Canadians buy nearly 1.8 billion loaves of packaged bread every year. Wonder Bread alone captures roughly 22% of that market, and a single loaf can sit on your kitchen counter for 3 weeks without going stale or growing mold. Real bread, flour, water, yeast, salt goes hard in 2 days. So if your $1.99 loaf stays soft for weeks, what exactly is holding it together? In Canada, packaged white bread is more than a staple. It's a fixture in daily life. Supermarket shelves move nearly 1.8 billion loaves each year, with Wonder Bread alone commanding about 22% of those sales. For Canadian adults over 35, average weekly intake sits around 85 grams of white sandwich bread, or roughly 2.5 slices per person every single week. These numbers mean that for most households, bread is not an occasional treat, but an everyday presence at breakfast, in school lunches, and alongside dinner. Yet the familiar loaf in the kitchen is not the simple food it once was. What fills that bag is a product of industrial food science, built from a formula far removed from the 4 ingredients in traditional bread. As a result, the bread Canadians rely on most is engineered to behave in ways no home-baked loaf ever could. The question is no longer just what's in your bread, but whether it still deserves to be called bread at all. A real loaf of bread is a study in a simple 4 ingredients: flour, water, yeast, and salt, combined to create a food that's been made the same way for centuries. In a traditional bakery or home kitchen, the process begins with mixing and is followed by a long, slow fermentation. The dough rests for 8 to 24 hours, allowing wild yeasts and bacteria to break down complex starches and develop deep, tangy flavors. This extended fermentation not only builds taste and texture, but also produces natural acids that help the loaf stay fresh for a short time, usually 2 to 3 days at most. Without chemical preservatives or industrial shortcuts, the bread is at its best the day it's baked. By the second day, the crust softens and the crumb starts to dry out. By day 3, staling is unmistakable. If a loaf sits on the counter for a week and still feels soft, it isn't following this natural pattern. The benchmark for real bread is clear: 4 ingredients, a long rise, and a freshness that fades as nature intended. Inside a modern Canadian bread plant, the clock starts ticking the moment flour hits the mixer. Industrial lines built by companies like Imar are engineered for speed and consistency, not tradition. Mixing begins in a planetary or spiral mixer, churning 150 to 200 kilograms of dough in just 5 minutes. The dough is then portioned, rounded, and shaped by machines calibrated to the gram. Proofing, which takes up to a day in a bakery, is compressed into 2 stages. An initial 20 to 30 minutes in a humid, steam-filled chamber, followed by a final 40 to 45-minute rise at precisely controlled temperature and humidity. Loaves are then sent through a tunnel oven, where a full bake is achieved in only 3 minutes, far less than the 40 minutes required for an artisan loaf. The entire journey from initial mix to packaged loaf takes about 3.8 hours. Every step is measured, timed, and automated. creating a seamless assembly line rhythm that never pauses. This relentless pace is only possible because of a chemical toolkit that replaces the slow work of fermentation. Without these additives, the line would grind to a halt, and the bread would never achieve the soft, uniform texture that Canadians have come to expect from a $1.99 loaf. The process is efficient, but it leaves little room for anything resembling real bread. The softness and shelf life of Canadian white bread are engineered through a precise chemical toolkit. Each additive in a Wonder Bread loaf serves a role that once belonged to time and fermentation. DATEM, or diacetyl tartaric acid ester of mono and diglycerides, is measured into the dough at up to 0.5% of the flour weight. It strengthens gluten, allowing the dough to stretch and trap gas in minutes, not hours. Calcium propionate, capped at 0.2% in Canada, acts as a mold inhibitor, giving bread a shelf life of up to 2 weeks at room temperature, something no home baker can replicate. Sodium stearoyl lactylate, or SSL, is another emulsifier. It keeps the crumb tender and moist, helping each slice stay soft even after days on the counter. Mono and diglycerides, present in nearly every commercial loaf, further extend softness and moisture retention. These can introduce trace trans fats, but at levels below Health Canada's mandatory labeling threshold, so most consumers never know they are there. Dr. James Hartman, a leading food scientist at the University of Guelph, describes these compounds as the backbone of modern bread making. They are necessary for the speed and consistency of today's industrial lines, but entirely foreign to traditional baking. This is the chemical lineup that makes a $1.99 loaf behave nothing like bread from a bakery. Azodicarbonamide is a name most Canadians have never heard, yet it's found in nearly every mass-produced white bread loaf on the shelf. In Canada, bakers can legally add up to 0.1% of this chemical to flour, a limit set by Health Canada after a 2016 review. But across the Atlantic, azodicarbonamide is banned outright. The European Union removed it from all food products in 2006, and Australia followed with its own prohibition. Their reasoning: when heated, azodicarbonamide breaks down into semicarbazide and urethane, compounds flagged by toxicologists for their potential to damage cells in high concentrations. Laboratory tests on Canadian bread show semicarbazide residues averaging 20 micrograms per kilogram, well below the EU's provisional safety threshold, but still present in every slice. The World Health Organization warns that the real risk isn't just what ends up in the bread, but what bakery workers inhale. In plants, where the powdered additive is dumped into mixers, airborne particles can trigger asthma and respiratory irritation. Ms. Elaine McAllister, a former Health Canada toxicologist, has stated publicly that while the levels in finished bread are considered safe for consumers, the rules do not protect workers from inhalation hazards. Canada's current regulations remain under review, but for now, azodicarbonamide stays on the approved list, a stark contrast to the bans enforced overseas. This gap highlights a deeper question. Why does a chemical ban in Europe and Australia remain a staple in Canadian bread? And what does that say about the standards shaping our daily food? Enrichment is supposed to redeem white bread's nutrition, but the reality is far less reassuring. Canadian law requires that 6 nutrients, thiamine, riboflavin, niacin, folic acid, iron, and calcium, are added back to refined flour. Over 20 other nutrients, including vitamin E, magnesium, potassium, zinc, and nearly all the fiber, are never replaced. A slice of Wonder Bread contains less than 1 gram of fiber per 100 grams, compared to over 12 grams in whole grain flour. The result is a food that fills but does not truly nourish. Sugar quietly plays its part. Every 2 slices a serving of Wonder Bread delivers 4.2 grams of added sugar, about a teaspoon, hidden in the daily sandwich. For many, that is nearly 10% of the recommended daily sugar limit before any jam or spread is added. Emulsifiers like Datem and sodium stearoyl lactylate, combined with sugar, do more than a sweeten. They change the bread's structure. Cereal science studies show that these additives cut staling by 30%, holding back the natural firming that signals real bread is going stale. The softness that lasts for weeks is not a sign of freshness, but of chemistry at work. Canadians are left with a loaf designed for shelf life, not for health. Ingredient lists on Canadian bread packages are designed to look transparent, but key details remain hidden. Regulations require that additives like Datem, azodicarbonamide, and mono and diglycerides be named, yet their actual functions, such as dough conditioner, oxidizer, or emulsifier, are left off the label. This means shoppers see chemical names but have no clue what roles they play or why they are there. The nutrition facts table only calls out trans fat if it reaches 0.2 grams per serving, so the trace amounts from mono and diglycerides slip by unreported, even though they are present in nearly every loaf. The label may say "Made in Canada," but there's no obligation to reveal where the wheat, oils, or additives come from. Anika Patel of the Food Awareness Council points out, the system is built to meet the letter of the law, not the spirit of consumer understanding. For Canadians, the result is a package that looks complete but keeps the real story just out of reach. Navigating the bread aisle doesn't have to be guesswork. One simple filter, choosing loaves with 6 ingredients or fewer, instantly screens out most ultra-processed options. In a 2023 consumer tech study, applying this rule online eliminated 73% of packaged breads from search results. The few that remain are almost always from local bakeries or artisan brands, where ingredient lists read like a home recipe: flour, water, salt, yeast, and sometimes a touch of oil or honey. A 2024 survey of Canadian artisan bakeries found that nearly all their loaves list 6 ingredients or less, and every one relies on long fermentation instead of chemical dough conditioners. Look for whole grain as the first ingredient and ask about proofing times. Breads that rise for 12 hours or more almost never need preservatives or emulsifiers. The shorter the ingredient list and the longer the ferment, the closer you are to real bread. A $1.99 loaf that stays soft for 3 weeks relies on Datem, azodicarbonamide, and calcium propionate. Not on anything a baker would use. Canadian regulations permit it, but transparency lags behind science. The choice is yours, but real bread and real clarity are getting harder to find. Trust the process.